Solar Opposites recently released its 5th season on Hulu, delivering what I feel was another incredibly strong season of television. When the show began back in 2020, it was sort of initially written off as a Rick and Morty clone, which I guess is fair at a glance. While Solar Opposites definitely garnered a fan base, the cartoon-watching public seemed to have kind of agreed. It's no Rick and Morty. Well, the cartoon-watching public outside of myself, I made a video that year about how I thought Solar Opposites was kind of a breath of fresh air in the midst of a lackluster season for Rick and Morty. But 4 years later, it kind of seems like the tides have turned a bit, where the Rick and Morty fan base has seemed to slowly drop off from the show amidst long waits between seasons, and Solar Opposites seems to have as passionate of a fan base as ever. Today, I want to not only go over why I thought Solar Opposites Season 5 was maybe their best season yet, but how I find it and Rick and Morty's inverse trajectories in the court of public opinion to be super fascinating. Hey, this video is brought to you by two things today. One is my official compilation channel, Johnny Too Cozy, where I'm re-editing tons of my old videos into themed compilations, long videos that are great for sleeping or drawing. And second, my wonderful patrons who get tons of extra content exclusive to Patreon. We're currently in the middle of season 2 of our BoJack Horseman audio commentaries. Check those out if they interest you. Thank you so much for your support. I couldn't do it without viewers like you. Okay, so this video is going to have two major sections. First, I'm going to talk about the public perceptions of Solar Opposites and Rick and Morty and how those shows have evolved, and then in the back half, I'm going to review Solar Opposites Season 5. Time codes will be in the description if you want to focus on one over the other. Before we get too deep, I want to say, I do not think that Solar Opposites is more popular than Rick and Morty, at least in terms of cultural impact and viewership, but I do think that its fan base might be more dedicated, and I think there is a clear reason for that. Rick and Morty launched in 2013, and over its first 3 seasons just skyrocketed to massive acclaim and fanfare. Honestly, unlike any cartoon we've seen in maybe the last 20 years. But with that kind of absolutely monumental success comes equally monumental expectations, especially when the wait between seasons 2 and 3 of Rick and Morty, the height of its growing popularity, was basically 2 long years, with another 2 years between seasons 3 and 4. Season 3 immediately disappointed some of the fan base, and each season that the show didn't quite live up to the standards set by season 2, the more people became disillusioned by it and slowly dropped off the Rick and Morty train. The bar was set so high early on that the perception of the show became that it's just getting worse and worse. This is coming from someone who actually really liked season 7. I thought it was probably their best season since season 3, but the reality is that it felt more like a surprising step in the right direction than anything else. But between the long waits, inconsistent release schedules, and a fan base that is desperate for more serialization and lore in a show that is way more interested in episodic storytelling, it makes sense why Rick and Morty has slowly fallen out of favor amongst the diehards. Solar Opposites, however, has always had to live in Rick and Morty's shadow, another series co-created by Justin Roiland as well as former Rick and Morty showrunner Mike McMahon, drawn in the exact same art style, also a main character who just sounds like a Rick knockoff. Of course, people were going to come in and immediately compare it to Rick and Morty and be disappointed that it's doing something entirely different. In fact, I did not receive a particularly warm reaction when I claimed I enjoyed Solar Opposites more back in season 1. How did I start that video again?
For fans of Justin Roiland, 2020 was pretty great.
Oh, well, now for fans of Justin Roiland, every year since 2023 has been pretty bad, but this initial reaction gave for Solar Opposites a bit of an underdog status. The show did well enough to be renewed, but unlike Rick and Morty, it quickly became a series that wasn't burdened with the same level of expectations. It was this little engine that could. Some people wrote Solar Opposites off as a bad Rick and Morty clone, but anyone who gave the series the proper time of day began to realize that the things Solar Opposites is doing are very different than Rick and Morty, intentionally. Basically, while Rick and Morty struggled to live up to massive fan expectations after its huge popularity boom, Solar Opposites was able to fly under the radar and slowly build a more dedicated audience. Rick and Morty burned hot and has since fizzled, while Solar Opposites' slow burn has allowed it to gradually reach a boiling point. And look, Rick and Morty is still wildly popular, but over the course of seasons 4 through 7, overt public fanaticism towards the show has frankly become seen as a bit cringe. Rick and Morty was previously this underdog series, a cool club that a handful of people were in, and those fans wanted to find each other. But amidst that popularity boom, many parts of the fan base became toxic and insufferable, and many people who enjoyed the show didn't want to be associated with those fans. But Solar Opposites has sort of lived in that underdog cult classic status for its entire run. Rick and Morty started out as this sort of countercultural symbol, only to become fully embraced by the mainstream culture. Now Solar Opposites kind of sits in its place, where people in that club can say, actually, Solar Opposites is better than Rick and Morty. I don't think Solar Opposites will ever be more popular than Rick and Morty, but I do think that it might be looked back on more fondly, and that is mostly a matter of perception. We've got a show that blew up beyond expectations, then failed to live up to its initial popularity, versus a show that was never given the proper time of day and is slowly chugging along until it reaches maybe cult classic status. And as it turns out, Solar Opposites is a really good show, and I think there are a lot of reasons that it's able to keep its audience invested without any major pushback, whereas Rick and Morty has struggled in this regard. I know some people complain about the constant meta jokes and pop culture references, but where in something like Rick and Morty it's sort of off-putting, for Solar Opposites, it's something that is actually vitally important to the entire premise of the show. Those kinds of jokes and references make sense because it's what the entire show is kind of about. The whole game of Solar Opposites is that this alien species is learning about life on Earth, learning how to be human, primarily through TV and movies. Ads and brands and pop culture are literally their primary window into what being a person is, which is why they act, well, like this. And what's genius about this premise is that it's as much a fun take on alien characters as it is a commentary on the state of our world and how it's filtered through all of these different forms of media. If you don't like constant pop culture references, I get it, but at least in this case, it actually serves a purpose. I generally find an over-reliance on this kind of stuff grating, but in this case, it just works. It's a foundational aspect of the characters and of the series. One big complaint you hear from Rick and Morty fans is how few and far between the more serialized stories are. They're always fan favorite episodes, but there are usually only 1 or 2 a season, while the rest is pretty episodic. Solar Opposites really has its cake and eats it too by mostly keeping the alien family plotlines to silly episodic adventures, while the more intense serialized stories are relegated to The Wall, or now the Silver Cops storyline. It's kinda silly, but Solar Opposites is basically 3 shows in one. I think that separation really provides the audience with a variety of storytelling styles throughout. But let's talk about season 5. Which had so much to love, starting with the follow-up to that pseudo cliffhanger from season 4, at the end of which the aliens had all become humans and went to wait out their body reversions on a different alien planet. But the premiere teases this idea that maybe the show is going to fundamentally change and take place entirely on this new planet now, which obviously doesn't come to fruition, but starting the season off in an entirely new environment was a really fun change. They even introduced this new robot character who follows them back to Earth.
Yeah, it's like a character who was added in the 5th season of a TV show who's very polarizing but has big merchandising potential.
Yeah, it's just a cute new character to keep Pupa occupied, and it sort of falls in line with the ways the series parodies sitcoms in general. J.K. Sevens is our cousin Oliver, but I like that Solar Opposites is always willing to try these new things. I guess that's also a good time to say I think Dan Stevens is really fitting into his role as Corvo. I already liked him a lot last year, as I was never a huge fan of Roiland's knockoff Rick voice for Corvo, but last year, Stevens definitely had to fit his performance into something that was written with Roiland in mind. I think this time they were able to utilize him properly and more seamlessly. Another episode I really liked was Live, Die, Repeat Device, formerly known as the Edge of Tomorrow device. I think this title is pretty self-explanatory, but the reason behind them starting to use the Live, Die, Repeat device is so funny.
Follow me.
Lead the way, Daddy.
Did you just call the House Depot guy Daddy?
Dude just starts using the device so he can go back to House Depot without calling this guy Daddy. But he just keeps calling him Daddy. It's so funny. But this turns into a Terry's Day Out type episode where he leaves all of the other members of the family dead, waiting for him to join them so they can repeat the day. And it sort of turns into this beautiful reaffirmation of his relationship with Corvo. He spends a day with a human who is entirely too much like him, and he puts Terry through this absurd pop culture board game of his own design. And in the end, Terry appreciates Corvo all the more, even helping him through his House Depot daddy problem.
I said, hey, Daddy, can I sign up for the House Depot credit card?
I also really appreciated a sort of experimental episode they did called the Sci-Fi Rollerblades. This is basically just a full-on Looney Tunes or Tom and Jerry inspired slapstick episode. After a kid named Brad beats up Jesse and Yumulak, Corvo tries to get revenge on his dad, but is repeatedly beaten to a pulp. The entire episode is just Corvo trying to use their superior alien technology to beat up Brad's dad, obviously paying homage to Wile E. Coyote's Acme-based antics. Oh, and hey, Warner Brothers, release Coyote vs. Acme, you pieces of shit. Anyways, the tone of this episode is just entirely outside the norm for a Solar Opposites episode, down to the music being whimsical, over-the-top orchestral jaunts that perfectly accompany Corvo's repeated failures. It's just a ton of fun, and I think likening the aliens' constantly plot-perfect technology to Acme products is very funny. Though I have to say, I don't know if I laughed anywhere near as hard as I did during the episode The Solar Opposites Do an Intervention. To be fair, most of this episode is just Pupa and JK7's ongoing conflict reaching this boiling point, alongside a classic Wall subplot, but as Solar Opposites tends to do, they give the aliens a very funny background gag. Basically, without saying as much, they're giving an intervention to Mario. You can only see the Mario character's lower halves, but it's all about how Mario is now hooked on coke since his newfound movie stardom, and it is unreasonably funny.
No more tennis, no more golf, no more superstar sagas.
No more superstar sagas kills me. Perfect timing with that series being revived too. But alongside these classic silly one-off adventures, they've also been slowly introducing more and more lore and backstory to the aliens and Schlorp over the past few years. Schlorpian lore, Schlor if you will. And this introduction was welcomed because it was done so gradually. It sort of came as a surprise, giving us just a little bit more from the usual silly sitcom adventures, basically starting with the episode 99 Ships back in season 3, showcasing what actually happens when a pupa properly terraforms a planet. Season 5's continuation of this lore is no different. For one, the pupa resets because of their time on the alien planet at the beginning of the season, but we get some huge revelations through a pretty fun episode called The What If Device.
Inspired by how they do it in Futurama, now airing on Hulu?
No, it's a very different thing. Don't say that or we'll get an email telling us we can't do it.
I actually love how they differentiate the storytelling from the What If machine in Futurama. You'd expect it to be a non-canonical romp, but they actually make the episode the most canonical of all, revealing that the What If device has actually been running for years, and that the person who ran the What If device was their former team leader. Thanks to their What If device, they actually had no idea this guy ever existed, or that he was a huge dickhead. But it's a fun reveal, basically showing that though they've survived, unlike most other Schlorp teams, they're likely failing in their terraforming mission because this guy isn't properly leading the team. The end of the season basically sets this guy's return up as a big impending event, something that could fundamentally change the Solar Opposites mission. I could see them sort of solving this issue in a one-off story, but I could also see them making this character an ongoing foil, somebody who is constantly trying to get the mission back on track while the Solar Opposites keep trying to show him what's so great about living on Earth. This could actually sort of reintroduce the initial odd couple vibe to the show. Obviously, Terry and Corvo are still very different and butt heads often, but since they've become a full-on couple, they definitely align more often, and their general goals moving forward are mostly the same. So, bringing in a new foil makes a lot of sense given the title of the show. I'm also really curious what they're going to do about this giant Yumulak head. That whole replicant is food for the pupa reveal was pretty wild as well. But obviously, aside from Solar Opposites, we've got the two other shows within the show. The thing that really makes this show stand out from just about anything else on TV. While they do intersect and the main story of each were incited by the Solar Opposites, the Wall and the Silvercop stories largely stand on their own, and I think they went some really interesting places this year. As far as Silvercops goes, it's been fun to learn more about the universe at large, but I mostly just really love Kieran Culkin as Glenn. I'm pretty invested in that character, and I love that they got Stephen Lang to play this evil alien general. Stephen Lang plays Colonel Miles Quaritch in the Avatar movies, so he's got some genuine experience in this kind of role. And please spare me the Avatar has no cultural impact comments. I'm gonna go rewatch Way of Water while you're commenting that. I did like the revelation that the entire military system surrounding the Silvercops is corrupt, and they're basically the bad guy bullies of the galaxy. I mean, they basically colonized these poor pony people. Absolute monsters. But I'm also not too sold on these gold cops, who we'll get to know in season 6 probably. As for the Wall, this season was the kind of expansion we needed from that story. I think people have felt like it was spinning its wheels a bit last season, and I don't fully disagree. Transitioning from the wall to the backyard introduces such a new world and so many new challenges. Granted, we got a glimpse of the yard itself from that perspective back in season 2, but with many people leaving the wall at the end of season 4, I loved seeing how they expanded into individual societies in the backyard and how their surroundings change. Gutterville, Sandbox Town, Basketballburg. I also love how uncreative these names are. But I love that while the world evolves and the circumstances change, most of the motivations stay the same. People want power. This time, a guy who wants to control the access to water in the entire yard so he can jumpstart an economy with his yard bucks.
You used to be the head of the Wall Council. You were one of the good guys.
I still am a good guy.
This is such a vital aspect of these wall stories. Every single character who has seized power and become a villain was once on the quote-unquote good side. But with Basketballburg's downfall comes the rise of Sherry. Finally, I predicted this in my wall video 2 years ago, but it seems like Sherry is finally taking on her role as this supreme leader of the tiny people.
I will finally take the seat of power. You want my help? Then bow!
And alongside this claiming of her role as queen of the backyard is another Solar Opposites intervention with this story, as Terry uses this aliving ray to bring life back to the mostly dead yard. And I think this is pretty vitally important for a few reasons. One, it means Sherry's reign will begin with unprecedented growth and prosperity. I think Sherry's reclamation of leadership will be seen as this divine thing, and I think the expansion of her society in the backyard is going to be particularly significant. But then there is, of course, the other reveal, that the ray also brought the Duke back to life. Now, I don't think it will bring Tim back to life since he was cremated in season 3, but obviously the Duke's return could be massive. And I think the other thing that we have to think about is what remains in the wall. While most have retreated, there have got to be some people left in there.
If they survive the backyard, they'll return to find the wall better than ever before. Because from now on, we build friendships instead of barriers.
And I am very curious if they'll utilize the wall in a meaningful way moving forward. Maybe we'll get a wall versus the backyard storyline. There are so many possibilities and so much to speculate about, but I'm going to save a lot of that for my expanded wall video, probably releasing next week, adding analysis for seasons 4 and 5 onto my existing video about seasons 1 through 3. But to zoom out to Solar Opposites as a whole, one thing I would really love to see in season 6 and beyond, or more likely in whatever the final season of the show is, I would love to see all 3 of these ongoing storylines intersect for the ultimate finale. Somehow make the Solar Opposites storyline, the Silver Cop storyline, and the Wall storyline all coincide, making the climax for each story one and the same. Would kind of be an amazing magic trick, right? We'll see how it goes. Solar Opposites has been renewed for season 6, and I'm hoping it continues beyond that, but it's hard to say just how likely that is. Hulu is certainly invested in their slate of adult animation with the Futurama and upcoming King of the Hill revivals. Plus, they're just the home of every adult animated show ever. I would be surprised if they ditched their long-running original adult animated show while they tried to maintain the audience, but who knows? Alright, that's all I got for you, so tune in probably next week for my expanded wall video and maybe a Silver Cops video if I've got the time thinking about that one. And let me know in the comments how you're feeling about Solar Opposites season 5 and as a whole. Alright, I'll catch you next time. Peace.
I stay mellow watching Johnny Two Cellos. He talks cartoons, he's a really cool fellow. He keeps you posted on adult cartoons. If that's what you're into, then grab a spoon and a very big bowl of your favorite cereal. Feels like Saturday morning cartoon material. Johnny Two Cellos, watch him on YouTube. Now enjoy this groove and bust a move.